Day 2. Morning greeted our cabin not with the warmth of the sun, but with a chilling cold and the smell of urine. 3 kids had wet their beds through. A 4th had rolled over on an artificial urine bag, causing it to burst. In a stupor, Dominic and I began the cleanup and morning runs to the bathroom. The loudspeaker hurried everyone to breakfast with a trumpet. You gotta get up, you gotta get up. What a joke. It was noisy at breakfast. For the first time, I felt the kids' presence as individuals, each of them watching Dominic and me, stealing a glimpse and then staring. Perhaps looking at us for the first time, seeing if we would stay. It wasn't a challenge, but a real question. I felt it. I looked back. The first of our kids was Benny B. Benny was black, peanut in size. Polio had taken his legs, but not his gall or heart. He was the most mobile kid at camp. One kid that Dominic and I didn't have to push or help with the toilet. He was his own man. Most kids have a thing they do, something special. For Benny B, it was speed. With a crash helmet pulled tightly over his head, he hunched forward in his wheelchair like a dirt track driver in a stock car. Once snugly into position, he reared back with both arms, giving the chair a rocking motion that could be thrust forward at incredible speed. He peeled rubber and was off, hydroplaning across the dusty camp floor, then spinning and heading back to the cabin, finishing the dash with a wheelie that only he could do. The spokes on Benny's chair were decorated with stickers and reflectors. At night, he was a light streaker through camp. On the back webbing of his chair was the name of this speed freak, Benny B. Spider was another kid in our cabin. It was a funny name because Spider didn't have any legs or arms. He had stumps that stuck out from his short frame like broken branches out of a tree. Like Benny, Spider was alert and perceptive. You could tell by his eyes. Children handicapped by illness that floods the brain with fluid or strikes off oxygen at birth seem to stare without seeing. Attention seems pulled by a constantly moving magnet. Eyes seem cloudy, unable to sparkle or hold on to anything. Spider's eyes held everything, and what his eyes couldn't hold, his mouth tried to trap. Spider loved to talk and talk and talk. It was like being in the presence of a jukebox. The only difference was that this machine was self-operative. Spider had to be fed, but even that didn't stop him. He just talked, swallowed, and talked some more. Far less active and alert than Benny B or Spider was Thomas Stewart. He had MS, muscular sclerosis, and the cruelest ailment of all. Thomas must have been 15 or maybe 16. It was hard to tell. Benny B and Spider looked and acted like the 8 and 10-year-olds they were, but Thomas, it was hard to know anything about him. All the children were light in weight, but Thomas was the lightest. He weighed about 35 pounds. Picking him up was like holding a collapsible tent. He just gave way. There was no center of gravity. His bones seemed unconnected. Indeed, that's what the disease had done. Over 11 years, it had slowly and certainly robbed Thomas of the fiber and muscle that held his body together. I think the act of watching and feeling this gave Thomas an awareness of the deterioration of his own body not felt by children afflicted from birth. Thomas had eyes that seemed like wells. They locked up secrets. His mouth was always dry, almost crusted over, pinched tight as if to hold out the invading air or hold in some final scream. He watched the world about him, but gave nothing to it. He was sullen, hunched over in his chair, always covered by a dark blanket, unwilling to move unless moved, pensive, patient, and dying. Martin was the most able-bodied child in our group. Like other blind children in camp, he had a constant smile and seemed in perpetual motion. Sitting still, he would rock forward and back, even standing. He swayed rhythmically. I wondered what sound or unseen tide pulled at him. Martin was extremely likable and outgoing. He was about 14, tall and slender, with bright red hair that stuck out in every direction. In strident steps, he would march across the campgrounds, I was amazed at how straight he always walked. In many ways, he seemed to navigate like a ship. He could sense tree limbs and moving objects at head level. His only sensory block seemed to be at ground level. A slight indentation or tree root would cause a faltering followed by a stream of cussing. It was self-cursing, not directed at the obstacle, but at himself for not seeing it. Martin seemed a good kid, a little older and wiser than Benny B or Spider, and more demanding of himself than Thomas Stewart or Arid. Arid was the fifth kid under our charge. He got his nickname from his smell. It was awful. Arid, or Aaron Gerwalski, didn't have a bladder or the normal means to pull waste from the body. His skin was always clammy. A large water bottle-looking bag was attached to his intestines. The bag, strapped to his leg, collected a urine waste that had to be emptied every hour. He hated his own smell as much as those around him hated it. Arid wasn't a humorous name. This condition was terrible for anyone to carry, but for a young teenager, it must have been overwhelming. The smell repelled any gesture of friendship. It stalled and interrupted any conversation before it could begin. There you have it. The kids were gutsy, and maybe even the basis for lots of self-awareness. But I wasn't enamored by the prospect. I mean, this wasn't the way the job description read. Maybe I could deal with one child, but the thought of responding to such a thunder of pain, well, I couldn't do it. I wanted to go home, to get to the beach, to run as fast as I could, lie in the warm sun, breathing deep gulps of ocean air. Anything but care for this carnage. I couldn't do it, and I didn't want to try and fake it. In our first day of activity, we were assigned to the craft area in the morning and swimming in the afternoon. I contemplated getting sick or being called away to a family emergency. I also realized that I was afraid of any action. I was afraid to leave and face the thought that I couldn't take it. And I was afraid to stay for the same reason. There was no bravery or conviction in my action. I simply decided to stay. Like Thomas Stewart, I would close off all thoughts. I would endure. At the craft table, I rounded up Benny B, got Martin to work with Spider, and gave the quiet Thomas Stewart and Arid each a private workspace. Dominic went to scout the pool area and determine what kind of water activities we might get into. The craft table was full of leftover Boy Scout materials and sample projects. There were whistles, hatchet holsters, Indian headdresses, and bookends made out of pine cones. I busied myself with a nut necklace. It was an act of frustration. At least it symbolized how I felt. Crazy to be here. Absolutely crazy. Benny B asked what I was making, and I told him, a necklace. He could see it wasn't a designated project. Spider asked what the necklace was for, and asked. Finally, I blurted, I feel a little weird being here, so I've made myself a necklace of nuts. Spider didn't stop or recoil. He just laughed. So do we, counselor. We're all a little nutty here. Benny added, yeah, you might call us the Nut People. Yeah, that's a good name for us. I turned to Spider to tell him, my name isn't Counselor, it's Ron. He was already off with another question. Mr. Counselor, Ron, can we make a necklace like yours? Sure. When Dominic returned, we had a surprise for him. His very own acorn necklace. Benny B had raced about collecting every nut in sight. Spider told him where most of them could be found. Martin strung most of them together. Arid was delighted by the smell. Thomas Stewart by the gift. Within this brief encounter, we all had this crazy nut necklace in common. As we moved toward the pool, the other kids noticed our necklaces. Spider was quick to explain the sight. We're the Acorn People, can't you see? So we were dubbed and christened by our own act. Like it or not, we became the Acorn People. My fellow travelers and I were now drawn together like blood brothers. We would share a common history and fate. We would endure together. I'm glad I stayed. The swimming pool was a new world for everyone. The water gave buoyancy and freedom to our bodies and to the pent-up children in all of us. Each child was given an orange safety belt and carefully lifted into the pool. That's where the careful and restricted movement ended, and the teasing, splashing, racing began. Children and counselors held in bondage to chairs and harnesses were free. It was as if the water gave us permission to push each other and not just be pushed. We were comic aliens on a strange liquid planet, popping up and down in the water. We held each other and bobbed in unison to create huge waves, chased about like orange speedboats, squirted and spit at each other, or just relaxed and let the current of play move us about. Imagine sharks and sea monsters and pincher bugs, yelled and screamed. Each kid approached the water in a delightful way. Arid had to paddle about in an inner tube holding his bag above the water. It was his secret weapon. He threatened to squirt anyone who splashed him. It was an effective threat. Benny B grabbed a tube and, you guessed it, he became the pool's fastest inner tube. Arms flailing away like a windmill, he looked like a pool cleaning machine gone berserk. If Benny was the speed king of the pool, Thomas Stewart was the luxury cruise ship. In elegant grace, Thomas ended up sitting on 3 inner tubes, quietly riding the waves made by the rest of us. As for Martin, he was the classic submarine. The pressure of the water and the resonant noise of the pool seemed to give Martin a keen sense of what was happening. I watched him dodge and chase Benny B with radar intensity. His greatest pleasure, however, was a real fright. For some reason, he simply loved to unlock his belt and sink to the bottom of the pool. He would sit there cross-legged and motionless until his lungs called out for breath, or I reached down and grabbed him by his red hair. Thank God for that red hair. It was like a buoy that signaled for lifting. Of all the children in camp, Spider was the most amazing phenomenon in water. Just as I was about to commit myself to holding him in the pool, he said he wanted to show me something. Spider could swim. I propped him up at the edge of the pool as he instructed, and then waded in the water to catch him. With a headfirst plunge, he was in the water and pulling himself through it like a dolphin. His body seemed to lengthen out and undulate. First the head would surface, take a breath, then shoot downwards, only to arc back to the surface and dive again. With this repeated whip-like motion, Spider could swim. In watching Spider move with the water and use its turbulence, I thought of the fear he must have faced the first time in water and the endurance that allowed him to come to terms with this fear. As our session in the pool ended, Spider put on a demonstration of his ability by swimming the length of the pool. Several groups of children from other cabins gathered about, all watching intently this single figure submerge and surface its way across the pool. I don't think Spider had ever swum this distance. His movement in the water had slowed and almost stopped when he finally nudged to the end of the pool. When I lifted him from the water, his entire face broke out into a grin. There were whoops and smiles from everyone. It was not a smile I was familiar with. Not the smile of a raucous ego or an aggressive threat, but the smile of knowing. The blind children show this emotion best of all. It's as if their whole face lights up. Everyone was smiling with Spider. Me too. In our second evening of camp, the Acorn Society had its first meeting. The camp loudspeaker had blared its good night. A lantern was our only light. It was a warm light that matched my feelings. Everyone was accounted for. Heads cranked out of sleeping bags to meet the flickering shadows, to stay in touch. A long day had passed, but we made it. I sensed that the trial was shared. It was hard on everyone. I retreated in thought, remembering how Benny had cried in the bathroom when I tried to change him. I was mad at the time. He must have been hurt and humiliated at the rough treatment I gave him. The day was full of a minutiae of events, small victories. Just getting by was super. I felt good. I could make it. There were events like the Acorn Necklace and Spider's Swim to keep us all going. Dominic broke into this silent thinking. We were all just looking at each other. Dominic called the meeting to order and then proceeded to tell mafia stories. His breath danced into the cold air. I fell asleep with mafia gangsters and gun malls running around in my mind, chasing a group of kids wearing acorns around their necks.